Strombergson. He brings a wealth of experience in this to this masterclass, blending his strong R&D background with deep expertise in startup strategies and commercialization. With a passion for driving health innovation forward, Axel's insights will empower attendees to navigate the complexities of QMS implementation with confidence. So whenever I invite guests, it usually means that I need their advice and I need the knowledge. So it's a great, it'll be a great learning experience for me as we embark on this startup. So welcome, Axel. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Yuli. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me pull up some slides here, and we'll get started from there. There we go. Okie doke. Yeah, so I have about 30 minutes roughly here today. The way I'm going to cover that is through this agenda here, just a brief intro. Yuli gave a little bit of intro about myself, but I'm going to expand slightly on that to see where I'm coming from and what I've done myself in the past when it comes to the topic for today. Then in section 2 here, that's sort of where the meat and potatoes are for the talk. I know that the title of the talk today was more about the when, but I kind of expand a little bit about that to kind of put it in a bigger perspective in terms of the why, what, and also the how when it comes to MedTech quality management system. Section 3, just a few slides in terms of looking at the strategy for when you are going to select your EQMS, and I'm going to talk about what an EQMS is as well in section 2, so more about that. And lastly, it kind of wrapping up a little bit about what I do in my day job at Viva Systems and the product that I'm leading here, QuickVault, that I'm also going to be mentioning throughout this talk. And then I know after my 30-something minutes are up here, we do have quite a bit of time after this talk for conversations and other things. But also with that, feel free to post some questions in the chat, and then Yuli, maybe you can then chime in and bring that up because it might be hard for me to see if someone is asking me a question. Anyway, so with that in mind, jumping in, so a little bit about myself. So Axel Strombergson, I am right now Vice President at Viva System for this product called QuickVault. I've been 2 years with this company, and before that, I was over 20 years in the MedTech industry myself. Initially, I was in MedTech R&D. I have a master in mechanical engineering, so I started my career in designing medical devices for that. I also spent a few years at Vanderbilt University, the tech transfer office in Nashville, where I worked with research teams on the medical center and engineering school to help translate different technologies towards commercialization. Following a few years there, I went back into industry and been with multiple startups after that, but later in my career then shifting focus towards more operations and device commercialization. So all in all, I've been directly involved with 6 medicalized startup companies, but also been a very active startup mentor within different organizations such as accelerators and incubators. So, mentored probably a few hundred companies over that span. So I'm saying all that to say that what I'm going to talk about here today is something I lived firsthand myself in different shapes and forms with growth of different companies in the medical device industry. So jumping in then and start talking about the why. So MedTech quality management systems, why do we need a QMS? And it kind of comes down to the products that we're dealing with in this industry, right? Here I have 2 handheld stainless steel devices that in design and manufacture might be, somewhat similar, but from a commercialization perspective are very different. Bringing a consumer product like a spatula to the market is, of course, significantly easier than bringing a surgical scalpel to the market. And why is that? Well, that is because, of course, the regulations that we need to comply with in the medical device industry. And these regulations have been put in place by regulators across the world to make sure that medical devices are safe and effective for their intended use. Basically, just making sure that we as startups, when we bring product into the market, that they function as they intend to do, and they are then also safe for what they are needed for. On a high level, generally speaking, the regulations primarily that affects us here in the US and in Europe are the FDA regulations to the left here, 21 CFR Part 820, which is also referred to as the Quality System Regulation down here. Similarly, in Europe, we have the European Union Medical Device Regulation, or the EU MDR. And these sets of regulations have been put in place again to make sure that products that are brought to the market into commercial distribution are safe and effective for their intended use. When it comes to quality management system, what's good in this regard is that these two regulations, bundles of regulations, if you will, in the US and Europe are pretty similar in nature. And as a matter of fact, the FDA is actually, as we speak right now, updating their medical device regulations to be more harmonized with some of the things that are being done when it comes to medical devices in Europe. It's basically they're aligning their regulations closer to ISO 13485, which is a medical device standard I'm also going to mention here in a little bit. So in the next 2 years or so, the FDA regulations are going to be even closer aligned with the ones in the EU. But what kind of looking at what these regulations mean to us as startups, and basically, if we look at these regulations, they're more like guide rails in terms of how we need to operate our businesses, right? It's a framework in terms of how we need to approach everything from design and development to commercial distribution and other things of our medical devices. So looking at that more from a business impact perspective, I have a little flow chart here, sort of the journey that you would have to take from idea to commercialization. And if we start over here, we have an idea, then go into design, some pilot manufacturing or prototyping, if you will, preclinical testing, some cases clinical studies, to then get the data and documents that you need to get, say, an FDA clearance or your CE mark. The journey here through design and development and the testing of your device is applied or is done according to regulations, both from what I showed you on the previous slide, whether it's the FDA regulations or the ones in the EU. So this typically we talk about the pre-commercial stage. So this is the regulations that apply to you before you are in commercial distribution. Once you get that stamp of approval from the FDA or your notified body, then you are going to go into the market and you're going to have your full-scale manufacturing, commercial launch, and some post-market activities such as post-market surveillance, possibly some clinical studies to build your marketing materials, and so on and so forth. But basically what I'm saying here, the regulations that I mentioned at a high level in the previous slide applies to each of the steps along this journey in different shapes and forms. So if you look at it from the business impact, this is what you need to comply with. And the second part here is that was referred to as the post-commercial stage, and I'm mentioning it pre-commercial and post-commercial because I'm going to refer to that a little bit later in this talk. But anyways, on a very high level, that kind of covers sort of the why. You know, why do we need a QMS? And the answer to that is, of course, then that the quality management system that you have within your company is helping you to operate your business within the regulations along this journey, whether it's pre-commercial things that you need to do in terms of getting the data for your device, or say that you're in post-commercial stage and you might have a field event, a customer complaint, and you need to manage that according to the regulations. So that basically is the why we need a QMS. Moving along and then talk about what is a quality management system. Well, the way that I like to look at it is to get your medical device company in regulatory compliance and staying in compliance. There are three main pillars that you need to consider for that. And I will cover each of these individually in the few coming slides here. So I'm just going to touch upon them real quick here. But the first one is the quality management system itself, which typically consists of a number of different documents. So standard operating procedures, policies, work instructions, and so on and so forth. So think about the QMS as a bunch of Word docs. It's a good way to kind of think about it. And these documents describe how you operate your business to be aligned with the regulations that I just mentioned. The other piece of this puzzle is the eQMS software, and this is the product that I work on my day job, the QuickVault product. Back in the day, like 20 years ago, when I started my career and operated with a quality management system, that was 100% paper-based, which meant that everything that you had within your quality management system, whether it's your procedures or the engineering reports, plans, and so on and so forth, all had to be printed in paper and signed in ink. And that was all stored in different binders in fireproof cabinets. Nowadays, thankfully, with modern technology, we have access to cloud-based software such as QuickVault that helps us manage our quality management system in different ways to be much more efficient, but also have a higher security and retention of documents and things of that nature. And lastly, the third pillar is the knowledge that you have. So training and knowledge to really understand, how should we operate as a company to then be within these regulations and stay compliant. So basically, those are the three main components to get your medical device startup company into compliance and staying in compliance. So diving in a little bit deeper into each of these three components. The first one, as I mentioned, the quality management system is a set of documents that defines how you operate your business in different ways according to the regulations. So if you kind of think about that flow chart I had in the beginning, as you go on this journey from idea to product in commercial distribution, the standard operating procedures that you can see in a section here are then defining a lot of that in terms of how you operate as a business to be in compliance with the regulations. The screenshot I have here specifically is our documentation package that we provide to our QuickVault customers. So it's basically 53 different documents. So it's the quality manual and all the procedures, templates, forms, work instructions, policies, and so on and so forth that make up this quality management system documentation package. In general, you can get these type of procedures in different ways. You can buy them from a third-party consultant. Something like this would probably run you around $10,000 if you had someone provide it to you. But in general, these are pretty similar no matter where you get them from, because it's been streamlined to industry best practices over the past couple of decades. The only thing to remember, though, and this is very important, is that no matter where you get all these procedures and documents from, you need to modify them to fit your business and your product. I would say maybe in general, to kind of pull a number, a package like this might be 80-90% what you can use as is, but then the rest to 10 to 20%, depending on your business and your technology, needs to be sort of be updated and adjusted to the way that you want to operate your business. Because it happens a lot there that a startup have someone come in and put the QMS in place, and it's almost like a one and done, and then now you have a quality management system. But the thing is that a lot of the times, it's not reflective of how that company operates. So that means that right from the get-go, you're operating out of compliance. And that's actually the only way to really be in compliance and run your business day to day to be within regulations, is to make sure that your procedures are reflective of how you want to operate. And I kind of mentioned earlier here in one of the slides is that the regulations are more like guardrails to kind of keep medical device companies within certain boundaries, right? So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can operate your business. Say product development as an example, which I'm going to talk more about here in a little bit. The way that you do product development and how you want to design and get the data for your product, there's some flexibility in terms of how you do that, with then the layer of the regulations on top of that. But I'm saying all that to say that it's important that these procedures is a good reflection of how you want to operate your business from a day-to-day basis. And this is not also a one-time effort. It's going to need some changes over time, because if you're a two-person startup that puts this in place to get your data together for your, say, 510(k) submission, 3 years later, when you're 15 or 20 people and you're manufacturing and distributing product, you might want to operate a bit different. So that's a good time to also reflect over the necessity of updating your procedures to make sure that they always aligned with how you operate your business. Anyways, so that's sort of the quality management system itself. Think about it as a lot of Word docs. That's a good way to kind of think about it. The EQMS software, like I mentioned, thankfully nowadays, we have modern cloud-based solutions to help us manage different things. And the EQMS software is used to help manage your quality management system. Some things that it helps with that's really good, especially if you are first-time founders. A lot of regulatory processes are automated. So these softwares typically be able to kind of help walk you through in terms of some of the steps that you need to do. And that can specifically be around design and development, sort of how to follow design controls and risk management and so on and so forth, where automation applies and makes it easier to manage that rather than in Excel sheets and other things of that nature. These softwares also, if you can think about it as a repository, a safe place to store all your documents and data for your product and associated operations within your company. And also having electronic signatures that are then compliant with FDA regulations for electronic signatures, which is 21 CFR Part 11, is also extremely helpful. Like I mentioned back in the days, we printed documents in paper and had to sign in ink. Now in a solution like QuickVault, you would route documents for review and approval and sign off electronically within that system with a full audit trail for that. So basically, this type of software helps you to get in compliance and staying in compliance, and it's especially helpful if you haven't done this before, right? Because staying in compliance can be complicated for different type of processes. Then also, as you march through this journey, like I talked about, from idea to getting to your FDA submission, say, a system like this also helps organize your documentation, so in terms of your design history file and technical file, and so on and so forth. And typically, at least QuickVault is built for that type of work as well, to kind of streamline the process of getting you ready for that submission. And lastly, once you're in commercial distribution here in the US, of course, you are subject to audit. Unless you're Class 3 device, then you have to have an audit before that. But most devices are fit in that Class 2 category. But once the FDA comes and knocks on your door, then a software like this will help you with that audit to be able to find the documents that the FDA would be asking for. So lastly, training and knowledge, the third pillar. A lot of first-time founders, of course, haven't brought a medical device to the market, right? And nothing of what I've talked about here today in terms of the regulations and other things is very complicated. You know, a lot of what you guys do in terms of the technology that you're going to bring to the market and the research that goes behind that is vastly more complicated than anything that has to do with QMS. That all being said, this kind of falls into the bucket of you don't know what you don't know, right? So even simple things can be complicated if you haven't done it before, right? So that's where training and knowledge, why that also gets very important for you to kind of acquire that knowledge to be able to easily stay in compliance and follow the regulations. And a good way to do that is to get involved in organizations and accelerators. So being part of InnovatorMD is really good, and attend these type of classes, but also accelerators and other things where they provide you with additional education, but also get you in contact with mentors and other things is super helpful, right? So that's, generally speaking, a really good way to increase your knowledge is through engagement in different communities, and also think about networking in different avenues and ways for that, to really get in contact with people that, like myself, that you know, we help out in our spare time for free to kind of help founders and others, right? And there's a lot of people like that out in our ecosystem. So that's one of my recommendations is just network, get connected with people, get mentors, ask questions, and learn that way. Of course, you also have the opportunity for third-party support. So, of course, most of the time that's going to cost a little bit of money to, say, hire a part-time consultant that can also not only educate you, but also help you with some of the things around your quality management system and things of that nature. And lastly, my last bullet point here says hire experienced people. So as you grow your business, and we all know that, you know, being in an early startup in the medical device industry, we're always short of money, right? So it might be tempting to to look for less experienced people because they, generally speaking, are cheaper. But in my experience, it always pays off to pay that premium for someone that has high experience, no matter what it is in your organization, because not only are they going to know right from the get-go what needs to be done, especially when it comes to operating within regulations, but to typically also educate the rest of your team. So you kind of having an experienced person on your team pulls the rest of the team quickly up to a new level. So that's something to consider. So that's what I had planned to cover for what is the QMS. Then kind of going into the when, that sort of the title of this talk mentioned primarily. But so that is next section to kind of dive into that. So if you think about this journey, that again, the flow chart that I had in the beginning from idea towards commercialization, the place where you really need to have a QMS in place is not, if not before, is when you get to the formal development of the device. And I'll talk more about what I mean with that. But anyways, when it comes to the development of the product, where you basically are building products, whether software products or hardware products, and you test them in different ways to gather that data that you intend to provide to the FDA or your notified body to get their stamp of approval to then sell your product. That formal development is regulated as part of the subset of regulations that applies to you. And in the US, is subsection 30, so 820.30 of 21 CFR. That's called design controls. So basically, design controls is a set of regulations around how the FDA wants you to go about when you do the formal development and gathering that pile of documents that you're going to submit to them, basically creating that design history file and your device master record and other things that you need to have for your submission. Similarly, in Europe, the ISO standard that I mentioned earlier, ISO 13485, that covers also design and development of medical devices. But also, as I mentioned in the beginning here, FDA is updating some of their regulations to be more aligned with ISO 13485. But anyways, what this sort of means more in practicality, to try to kind of like describe this in a different manner that hopefully makes a little bit more sense when it comes to the timing and when. And that is looking at the R and the D of R&D. So R&D, as you know, stands for research and development, but it's a clear difference between research and development, even though sometimes people kick around R&D as it's like it's one thing, right? But so research and development are two different phases when it comes to going from an idea to a medical device that's ready to be sort of distributed or submitted to the FDA for distribution commercially. And if you kind of look at the development timeline over here in the start, where you have your idea, you probably have identified some sort of a clinical need or a problem, and you have an idea how you can solve that, whether it's a software device or hardware device or a combination of the two, right? So typically what happens, of course, is that you start building some early prototypes to see if the idea that you have is going to solve that problem. And then over time, as you iterate on these prototypes, you may put them through a different type of testing, whether it's bench testing, animal testing, or even early feasibility testing through a clinical study. You're going to refine these products and getting sort of further and further along this path here. And eventually you're going to get to the end here of the research phase where you feel very you feel very strongly about the design that you have come up with, that's actually going to solve the problem that you have identified. But also what's important there from a startup perspective, that you also can manufacture that device to a certain cost to give you the margins that you need to have a commercially viable business. But in either way, at the end of the research phase here, you are at the point where you say, okay, cool, we've figured out, we have a design of this product that we want to bring to the market. We now want to start gathering the data that we need to submit to the FDA or show to our notified body. That is like a line in the sand that's often referred to as point of design selection or design freeze. And that's where you would start a formal device development. And basically it's the shift here then from the R to the D. And in this development phase, that's where the regulations that I had in the previous slide, the design control regulations and ISO 13485, will apply to how you then from there on develop your device and gather the data for safety and effectiveness that you need to have for that regulatory clearance or approval. So that's this point of design selection. If not before that, that's when you really need to then have a QMS in place, because from there on, the development that you do, say that you are planning for an animal study, to test your device, to get some data that you want to present to the FDA, at that point, that development is now under regulatory, should be under regulatory control. So with that in mind, what we typically recommend is that you put your QMS in place about 3 to 6 months before you reach that point. So somewhere over here, when you start having some good confidence that, you know, we're on the right track here, soon we are going to be in a position where we want to start build, you know, finished devices that we want to put through testing in different ways to gather that data for the FDA. So, and the reason why we say that you want to have it in time for that, of course, is that, you know, things might go faster and you don't want to get to that point, and then you are going to launch like a big expensive animal study, but now you do that out of control. And if you do that and then submit that to the FDA, and there might be things that they find in that study, in that data, that they don't necessarily agree with, they can see that for whatever reason, maybe the documents weren't approved in a proper manner, or whatever it might be, they might reject that, and you would have to then go back and redo that study under the control. So that's why that's important. So that is the when. Then I'm going to cover the how as the last piece of this puzzle. And there's no exact way how to do this, but one way to do it that I've been part of and that I think is pretty reasonable, especially if you're a small team, is that you look at this as like a two-stage rocket. So basically implement your quality management system in two phases. And this also goes back to that little flow chart where I talked about the pre-commercial stage and the post-commercial stage, that the approach here is that you would implement the procedures and other things that you need for the work that you're doing. So in the pre-commercial stage, that would be then having all the different parts of your quality management system to manage the formal development, like I just talked about, in terms of developing a device under regulations to get the data that you need, and then take you to that submission, right? And then once you are through the regulatory authorities, then you can build the second stage, the commercial side of your quality management system, to be then able to handle that with your business now when you have the responsibility of having products out in the field. The reason why this is advised for smaller teams is that it reduces workload and associated training and knowledge. It's just rather than implementing the whole thing and everybody needs to learn the whole thing, and then it might still take 2 years before you need, for instance, managing customer complaints and other things of that nature. So just quickly, what I would look like. So in the pre-commercial stage, of course, that would be like what I talked about, everything that comes in play when it comes to the formal development of your device to gather the data that you need for a regulatory submission. And again, recommend put that in place like 3 to 6 months before you get to this point of design selection, before you really start gathering that data that you need for your submission. And in the post-commercial stage, again, that would be everything that has in the regulations that has to do with the responsibility that you have as a medical device manufacturer, having products in commercial distribution. And here are just a few examples of what goes into that. For this, we typically also recommend that you put that at least 6 months before expected FDA clearance or approval or your CE mark. And the reason, again, also for that, while maybe rare, it does happen that sometimes you get through this faster than you expect. And of course, the last thing that you want is that you have, say, an FDA 510(k) clearance, but you're not ready to distribute products. So you basically want to make sure that once you have that clearance, you know, your organization is ready to rock and roll, basically. That is what I plan to cover for the why, what, when, and how. I have a couple of slides to kind of talk about here what I mentioned, the EQMS selection strategy. So I've talked about QuickVault here today a little bit, the software that I'm working on, but I just wanted to mention because most of you, if you don't already have one of these software put in place, at some point as you implement your quality management system, will have to um, 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 find an EQMS and put that in place for your organization. So here's just a few thoughts of things that you can do when it comes to due diligence for that. And the way I'm going to approach this is quite unusual. So I'm going to talk about acquisitions because it happens that during the acquisition scenario, and everybody who is in a medical device startup company will probably be looking at some sort of an exit in the future, right? And the most common exit for medical device startup companies is an acquisition. But what's not talked about that often is that your quality management system may actually impact a future acquisition. And that's, like I said, it's not discussed a lot, but it actually happens. So here's what's going on with that. So during the due diligence in an acquisition scenario, of course, the acquiring company will come in and they will go through your business in different ways, like your IP, your finances, and so on and so forth. But they will also audit your quality management system. So looking at, for instance, the documents around your product, the formal development that we just discussed, but other things, of course, throughout your quality management system. And what they're trying to assess is whether the QMS is in good order or not. So what are the risks here, right? What are the gaps and things of that nature? Plus, they're also going to look at often how can we transfer this into the bigger organization. So a lot of times in acquisition scenarios, the smaller company is over time brought into the bigger umbrella. And it's during this due diligence where they audit your QMS where actually acquisitions fall apart. It does happen. I've talked to people both in Medtronic and Johnson & Johnson that are in M&A, and I got it confirmed several times that they do walk away if this is too messy, right? The QMS there's too much gaps. There's no clear pathway for bringing this into their organization. So for you to kind of avoid that, that of course would be a nightmare scenario. You're close to getting your business acquired and they walk away. Well, you kind of need to look at this from a strategic perspective, your quality management system. So you need a reliable EQMS from a solid provider. And the way that you do that, and I'm actually going to point you to a blog post that we have that goes even deeper on this at the end of this conversation to kind of really where you can read more about this. But of course, when you do this, when you select your EQMS, you need to do your due diligence, right? So when you shop around, do your due diligence. And the one thing that we do recommend is look beyond functionality. I did talk about doc control and change control, electronic signatures, and other things that these software have, but kind of look beyond that. And one way to do that is also evaluate the stability and reliability of the EQMS provider, because a lot of companies that provide these type of software solutions, they are startups themselves. And as we all know, it's risky business to be a startup. So the last thing that you want is all the documents and data that you have gathered around your product that is in jeopardy because the software provider goes out of business. Then also look at who is the company that provides this to you. Are they innovative? Are they engaged in the ecosystem? Do they understand where the medical device industry is going? Because as you know, regulations change, the industry changes. So you want to have someone that stays on top of this and is updating the software accordingly. And then also, I encourage you to think long term, right? So you have an immediate need. Typically, what we see with our customers is that they have a need. They get to this design selection that I'm talking about. They need to be in control of their design and development of their device to be able to get that clearance. That's the immediate need. But you should also think further than that. So your FDA clearance, say, is just a milestone to your commercial success, right? It's a big milestone, but at the end of the day, it's just a milestone for you to get into the market to start making revenue. So think about how an EQMS can also support you as you continue to grow as a company. So those are just a few things. I'll point you soon to that blog post where you can read more about that if you find it interesting. Last year, just a few slides of the company that I work for, and again, the software platform, if that's something that you're looking for and interesting to learn more about. But here's some background to that. So Viva, we as a company, we're quite large, and we've been around for about 17 years now. So about north of 7,000 employees. We're publicly traded, $3 billion in revenue. And when it comes to our customers, more than 1,400 in life sciences as a whole. And if we look at the medtech industry itself, 19 out of the top 20 largest medtech companies are using our solution. So going back to this acquisition scenario, it's very likely that your future acquirer are using our product. So if you think about this transition pathway from your small organization into these bigger companies, it's typically advised to use what your acquirers are using. I mentioned QuickVault a few times, but on a high-level overview, it has the standard functionality around documents and data, change management, but also quality events, managing your non-conformances, CAPAs, and complaints. Recently built out our training management module, so now that's really robust as well. And we also coming here shortly design and development, so the design controls that I mentioned, including built-in design reviews and also risk management functionality that's really robust, and tying all that together with also supplier management within that system. Something worth noting, going back to the 3 pillars of your QMS, we're actually pretty happy to announce that this week, together with Rook Quality Systems in Atlanta, which is a 40-employee company that provides quality assurance and regulatory affairs services to the medtech industry, we have partnered with them and put together a package that we called Quick Start. And this is basically what you sort of need to get going as a startup company. So you get that documentation package that I showed you earlier, all those templates, that's a $10,000 value. You get access to all the functionality within this QuickVault product for up to 3 users. In addition to that, per month, you get 5 hours of support from Rook that you can use as you see fit. So basically, that can be for training and education. It can be for regulatory strategy. It can be with submission help, whether it's a pre-sub or a 510(k) and so on and so forth. But we have put this together because this is what we have that we see that the startup community really needs. It's not enough to just provide the software solution itself or the associated documents. Typically, it's also very, very helpful to have that part-time support from experts that has done this many times before. And this has been priced pretty well. We're providing that for $1,250 per month. So if that's something you're interested in, you have my email there. You can reach out. But lastly, to wrap this all up, I mentioned also the blog post around the strategic approach to an eQMS. You will find that on our website here under the resources section, and I made a screenshot of it here so you can see what that looks like. But also on our website here, we have some more content. We actually just launched a video podcast where we interview various stakeholders within the medtech startup ecosystem. So that's going to be soon on our website as well. So that, everybody, is what I had planned for today. So just opening it up for some Q&A.
Thank you very much, Axel. That's a very good overview of what medtech startups need in a QMS. When you talk about FDA versus European EU, and they have to be done separately, correct?
Correct.
And are they pretty much similar, or do you have to start from scratch for the other one, for the EU?
Well, so for instance, if you follow the quality management system that we provide, it's been built to be compliant with both the European regulations and with FDA, right? So you don't have, if you follow that quality management system, then you should have what you need for both sides of things. Of course, there are, from a regulatory strategy and a type of product that you have, there are differences, right? For instance, in Europe, you typically need clinical data to bring a device to the market, even for low risk type of devices. Here in the US, as you probably know, most class 2 devices go to the market without any clinical data. So preclinical data is often only needed to demonstrate that safety and effectiveness. So they are I think we need to kind of separate sort of the quality management system and how that's built, and how different that is versus some of the things that you actually have to do to bring a medical device to the market. And for that, there are some differences.
Yeah. And if you plan to market it to the NHS system, are they part of the EU, or do they have a separate thing? Because Great Britain,
Who?
NHS, National Health Services in Great Britain, do you have to? So EU should cover, the, the whole EU, including Great Britain, right?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. I don't think, since they exited the EU fairly recently,
Exactly.
I'm not sure if they have changed a lot on that side of things. I haven't really dove into the British market lately to see if they have updated their regulations and deviated from the general. It's actually a very good question that I don't have the answer to. But for the rest of Europe, they're all under the same umbrella when it comes to
Yeah.
regulations. Of course, when it comes to device commercialization, that's a completely different story. It's actually, can be quite challenging to get into Europe because each country has their own purchasing systems. If we think about how reimbursement works in the US, right? There are just different versions of that, whether you're in Sweden, where I'm from, or if you're in Spain or have you, right? So typically you would focus on one country to start with and commercialize your device there to really understand how you
Mm.
can sell and get paid for your device, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Lindsay here.
Yeah.
Wonderful
Go.
presentation. I'm excited to learn about your background and QuickVault in particular. In terms of, you mentioned you have a startup introductory package. Did you say that that's for 3 months, and then do you typically do ongoing subscriptions, or what is the model usually?
Yeah, for that packet specifically, it's a 12-month minimum commitment, and after that, it's a month-to-month. For other, if you don't buy that package and you buy our smallest package beside that, which is up to 5 users, that is a month-to-month subscription model for that. So it depends on a little bit, the need that you have and what type of package that fits you best, but we have developed this specifically to be helpful for smaller startups, right? So we're not looking at tying companies up in 3-year contracts with staggered type of payments and other weird conditions. I've been part of that myself. We raised a round of money in a startup that I had, and was a trigger in the contract with that provider, and suddenly the solution was 3 times more expensive, which we couldn't afford. But anyways, nothing like that. You can even pay for a QuickVault with a credit card if that helps you with cash flow management and other things of that nature.
Nice. So the tool that I think I'm most familiar with is Greenlight, and I'm curious, just because that one I am, how you think this compares, if it's more built for startups in that regard, or if there's anything else I should be aware of.
No, I would say that we're a head-to-head competitor with Greenlight. I think if you look at our functionality roadmap that we're targeting later this fall to have regulatory submission functionality in QuickVault, integration to eStar, and other things of that nature. So right now, I would say we're pretty much head-to-head with Greenlight Guru, and later this year and going into next year, we're going to have additional functionality that's super helpful for the smaller medtech companies in our industry.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Great question. So is it usually the product person in the company that has to handle this, taking care of these things, or in a small startup, we may not have that many people assigned to each task. So who is usually doing this work? Is it the product person?
Well, I think you kind of said it yourself there. That of course depends on the size of your company, who you have. Everybody's wearing multiple hats, right? But typically, someone would be responsible for your quality management system, whether that's the chief operating officer, or whomever it might be, right? Typically, like, growing an organization, you have your regulatory affairs department, of course, that takes a lead to make sure that you have everything put in place to be operating accordance to the regulations. But in smaller startups that, I've been the CEO for a couple of companies, and I've had the responsibility of, implementation of QMS and lead that effort. But I guess also the answer to that is whomever also got time, right? But also, for that, the best approach to that is then leveraging a company like Quality System, like a part-time, when you fundraise, make sure that in your pro forma that you have a line item for quality management system, and not, both for sort of the subscription of whatever EQMS that you go with, but also having some money set aside for ongoing, some level of ongoing support from a third party, like a consultant that has that expertise, right? That is usually best practices to make sure that you bake that in. So once you get that round raised, then you have the money earmarked for that, and you don't need any questions from your investors why you spend it on these kind of things.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Axel. It's a pleasure. I always learn something new whenever you speak. So thank you for coming, and thank you for enlightening us. I'm sure at some point I'll be in touch with you for my own startup. But really appreciate what you do and helping small startups, although you are part of a much larger company. It's great to see that you are doing this with small startups. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me. It's an honor to work with you. So thanks again for the opportunity.